And we're live. Welcome, welcome. This is Milan Levis, of course, your financial empowerment mentor. And I'm very excited to continue our series of mini classes on the topic of managing your money intentionally. So, like I said, this is the third class, and today I want to talk about debt, specifically about debt rule of engagement, because it's very important to see the big picture. I always talk about strategic approach to perceiving your investment efforts and your money management efforts. So it's very important to see bigger picture when it comes to debt. So before I start this mini class, I want to remind you that we opened the doors to my long-awaited academy called Lasting Wealth Academy, which is 4 months training that incorporates integrative approach to creating financial independence in your life and building lasting wealth. So this program starts in March, and if you feel that this is something that would be a good fit for you at this time, I invite you to apply for this program. I will put the link to the information where you can get more information about this program in the comments of this video. But this is by application only. I want to make sure that it's a good fit for you, a good fit for me, because it's very important that at the end of the program you will achieve the desired results that you set for yourself. So it has to be a good fit. So again, by application only, I invite you to apply. And also, if you apply by the end of Sunday, February 25th, I offer some of the most amazing bonuses I could imagine. It would be free ticket for you to come to my 3 days workshop in the south of France. And I have a lot of incredible experiences planned for this workshop. So I hope that you will take advantage of this opportunity and apply before the end of the day on Sunday, because again, you have nothing to lose. If it's not for you, it's not for you. But who knows, maybe it's some opportunity that will completely change the trajectory of your life, especially financial trajectory. So that's what I wanted to mention before we begin the class. So last time, I talked about in our mini class number 2, I shared with you 4 financial freedom rules. And rule number 2 was don't owe more than you can afford, or don't borrow more than you can afford. And, obviously I was referring to borrowing money and incurring debt. So it is such an important topic to discuss that I decided to dedicate separate mini class to this topic, because some people feel that that is only a bad thing, because there is so much talk about not borrowing too much and not incurring debt. So I think it's from my perspective, it's very important to see the big picture, the strategic picture of that. And what I called, I refer to that as an instrument that can be bad or good, right? So you need to basically use this instrument the right way, because there is a bad debt and there is a good debt. So let's start with bad debt. So when you borrow the money from the bank, when bank is willing to give you a loan, but because you maybe don't have enough income, or maybe you don't have a good credit history, they will say, yes, we will give you loan. And in a small fund, it would be that, because of your maybe financial credentials, they will give you loan with a higher interest rate. So be mindful about, what conditions you take the loan under, what conditions that bank puts in your documents that maybe, not very obvious, or they don't emphasize it. So when you take the loan, despite maybe your current ability to repay the loan, and they still are willing to give you this loan, it's I consider this as a bad debt, because you put yourself in danger of not being able to repay this, and it adds stress to your life, and I would say unnecessary stress, because there is always a way to live within your means. Another example of bad debt is credit cards. When you get the credit card, and credit card companies are very happy to give you credit card applications and allow you to borrow money. They're especially very happy when you don't pay in full, because then they charge very high interest on the carryover amount. So I consider this also bad debt. Personally, I think that if you feel that you cannot pay your credit card in full every month, then maybe you should just use debit card, because then with a debit card you only can spend what you have on your account. And with a credit card, when they charge 19, sometimes even higher % on the balances that you carry over from month to month, it spirals. The repayment of your credit card becomes really a huge ordeal. Another experience that I came across was when student loan companies offer you to consolidate the payments. If you have multiple student loans, and the consolidated loan has a very high percentage. So I don't know, I just heard on the news today that 22% of student loans are about to default, and it's a crisis when it comes to student loans. So be very mindful when it comes to consolidating your loans, whether it's student loans or other loans, because very often these companies that offer you consolidate the loans, they charge high interest rate. So these are examples of bad debt. Remember that banks, financial institutions, when they lend you money, they don't do it for you, they do it to you. They have obviously very high interest in charging high interest from you, right? And when you borrow money and then you have to repay, because of the compounded interest, right? Because the interest that you pay, and if you carry over this loan over several months or years, then this interest accumulates. It's called compounded interest. You pay much more than the original principal that you borrow. So just be aware of this kind of kindness of the heart from banks and other financial institutions like credit cards. So we talked about bad debt. Let me talk about good debt. To create wealth, you need to use leverage. So leverage is very important when it comes to creating debt. And loan or borrowing money is a form of financial leverage. If you want to grow your wealth by acquiring assets that appreciate over time, it's often a good idea, appropriate idea to borrow money, obviously, right? So whether you want to borrow money for maybe to buy rental real estate properties that will give you passive income over the years and appreciate in value, or maybe you want to attain the education that requires licensing, and you will be in a better financial situation once you graduate from this institution, so you need to borrow to have a loan. So there are, I just want to, again, I want you to see that the debt can be good and bad. So let me give you specific examples again of a good debt. So buying a house that you can afford, and the key phrase here is that you can afford, meaning it's not very painful for you to pay off debt. You don't have to, restrict your, basic needs like buying grocery, etc. Because some people, they just see the house, they say I want this house, but they don't always see how they can repay this, and it becomes very stressful. And unfortunately, I came across a lot of people who bought proper houses that they could not afford, and they ended up in foreclosures. So there is no need to go that route. You can approach house ownership in a more strategic way until you feel that this is doable for you and you can repay without being stressed out over this. I mentioned buying profitable rental properties, meaning that you will be able to receive additional income from these properties, having positive cash flow. Another example of good debt is if you want to invest maybe in your education or in your health, because it will make you feel better about yourself and your life, because you are the most valuable asset you can ever have in your life. And I'm all for investing in yourself, whether it's health needs or educational needs. It's also important. And I also mentioned that if you feel that education, like student loans that will allow you to have a career that requires maybe licensing, and you cannot not go to this school or college, to have this career, that's also a good idea probably to invest in yourself and get the debt, but make sure that you're able to pay it off. So you see that there is a good debt and bad debt. And again, very often we get into debt that maybe is not necessary and even dangerous, right? And I already mentioned about compound interest, because when you borrow, for example, when you borrow a loan from bank to buy your house, if you borrow 200 or 300,000 as your principal of the loan, by the time you pay it off after 20 or 30 years, it's much bigger amount. And I'm not saying that it's not a good idea, because that is an example of the good debt, because you will enjoy the house and you will be able to pay it off, hopefully, right? But I'm not for buying, for example, a car using a car loan, because I think that it's often a high interest rate, and this is the asset that depreciates in value. So as a general rule, I suggest buying asset using that or borrowing when asset appreciates in value over time. So I have my notes here. I want to make sure I don't miss anything that is important. So what is responsible way of using financial leverage? Because we're talking about financial leverage when it comes to borrowing money for something that you see as a opportunity to grow your wealth. So first of all, when you approach borrowing money, you have to ask yourself two questions. Number one, can I afford it? Okay, we covered this. Can I afford it? It seems like a common sense, but sometimes we forget to ask this question when we become very excited about, buying a new car or buying new motorcycle or something like that, or going on an exotic vacation and paying with a credit card. And the second question is potential return on your money that you borrow higher than the cost of borrowing? Okay, the potential return on the asset that you buying using this loan should be higher than the cost of your borrowing. So that will probably help you, these two questions will help you to have more analytical, more practical, and more strategic approach every time you consider borrowing money, whether it's a credit card or loan from the bank. So I just want to remind you that bankers, that politicians, that investment advisors, they don't want you to be afraid of that. They want you to take that because they want you to embrace and be comfortable with borrowing money because that's profitable for them, right? So I want you to be more mindful and more strategic about your decisions, because ultimately that is risk, right? And it's not that I'm saying don't take risk, but I always emphasize that you should take calculated risk, right? So, for example, I was asked to give personal examples. I guess it's easier for people to understand when I talk about my personal example. So let's talk about calculated risk. When I decided, after I graduated from the business school, when I decided not to go to back to corporate America and I decided to start my company, I had my savings, right? So I was not in a position that I didn't have money to pay my rent or I didn't have money to pay my groceries. So I took risk. It was a leap of faith. But again, it was calculated risk. I knew that, you know, I had certain amount of time to take this company off the ground and, you know, cover my expenses. If I, at some point, if I got to the point that I could not do that, I would just find a job. Nothing is wrong with having a breed job because, you know, a lot of people, they have jobs that provides for their family and, you know, it's not their end job. So again, this was calculated risk, just an example of calculated risk. And another example that I know, Elizabeth, you wanted me to address in terms of teaching how to allocate percentage of your money toward your savings or etc. So you know, a lot of coaches, they talk about 10%. It's a good idea to allocate 10% toward your savings, 10% toward your maybe investment, 10% toward your donations. But it's not like a, you know, must do thing. So for example, when we just came to the United States and I had to look for a job and we didn't have vehicle, I decided that I will have, you know, I would allocate, I think it was 20%, as much, you know, as much as I could at this time. It was not 10%, it was more, because I needed to have a vehicle to go to the interview. So it's kind of common sense. So I would say minimum 10% if you, at the, you know, in a situation where you have to put aside less than 10%, it's okay. But when you have something important that will allow you to jump in your financial status quickly, for me it was, you know, going from a minimum wage job to going to having professional job. So for me, having a car was essential. So yes, I was allocating toward my savings much more than 10%. I hope I answered your question about money allocation toward different buckets. So I want to share with you in this class, I want to share with you different guidelines in terms of deciding what is the right move, you know, in terms of borrowing money. So first of all, before we even go into deep insights on that, I want to tell you that it's important to identify your unmet needs, because very often unmet psychological needs that we may not even be aware of may lead to a lot of unneeded, unnecessary expenses. For example, and you know, I've been in these shoes myself. When I was working on Wall Street, and at some point when I felt unfulfilled and not very joyful with the work that I was doing, and I had other challenges in my personal life, my outlet for fulfilling my needs was shopping. So shopping therapy is very common, and women need to realize that it's not something that they do because they need it. It's something that, it's a confusion in terms of needs, right? They have unmet needs and they don't have outlet to satisfy these needs, so they just use money to kind of, numb themselves, so to speak. I know some women, they say, I don't have other pleasures in life, so I buy designer clothes, or I buy designer purses or something like that. So just identify your unmet needs. Be aware what is really driving your desire to do, shopping and spend money on your credit card, and maybe even borrow against your assets. I know that some women borrow against their house to buy certain things that will just basically make them feel better about themselves. You can never have enough of what you don't need. And this, by the way, this phrase is from a book, Financial Recovery by Karen McCall. So make sure that you, if you're unhappy, get to the bottom of this. Don't use your money to numb yourself with shopping. Okay. So that was one that I wanted to mention. Another one, very common sense to me, but hopefully to you as well. Avoid bad debt as much as possible. So how do you avoid bad debt? I suggest 3 questions that I came up with. How much does it cost? What interest I will have to pay? So ask yourself, how much does it cost? What interest I will have to pay on this borrowed money? Number 2, do I really need it? Do I really need it? Okay. Number 3, can I afford it? Do I have ability at this time in my life to pay off this loan? So very simple questions, but I hope they will help you to pause and think about, whether this debt is something that you really should incur or need incur. So I also suggest that you use debit card instead of credit card. Unless you have ability to repay your credit card payments in full every month, I would suggest that you avoid credit cards altogether. Use debit cards because you cannot spend more than you have on your account. So it makes you, it puts you in a position to act more responsibly about your finances. Like, for example, I have my credit card linked to my bank account, and it's automatic payment. I always pay in full. And I have to watch out how much I have on my account before every monthly payment, but I never carry over the balances on my credit card. So next one is, okay, I covered this. Pay in full monthly balances on your credit card. I just covered this. I have my list. I want to make sure that I cover all of them. From my perspective, the next one, number 5 guideline is don't lease the car, buy it. So unless you have a business and you lease the car using your business, which you then can expense as a business expense, I do not recommend to lease the car, because usually it's more costly, and then at the end of the lease, you don't have an asset. So, I personally don't think it's a wise move to buy a new car. I mean, unless you, it's very essential for you, and, it makes sense for you, but car is depreciating asset. So you can buy very good mark car. You can buy, car in very good condition, maybe 1 year old, and it would be already less price than the new car. So the new cars always have some premium attached to them. So that was about leasing, buying versus leasing the car. Prioritize. Next, guideline number 6 is prioritize. So when I say prioritize, what I'm referring to, pay off your debt, your highest interest debt first, because you may have different loans. So look at all your loans: credit cards, student loans, you know, I don't know what else loans you may have, mortgage, and pay off the highest interest first. And as you I think it's part of this. So as you're paying off your mortgage, or as you're paying off your loan, whatever your highest loan is, make sure that while the paying off highest interest loan should be your top priority. But ultimately, I also want you to have to allocate some of your money toward savings, so especially toward emergency savings, because if you somehow got a chunk of money and you want to repay all your debt, and then something happens in life, which it often does, and you need money and you don't have your savings, then you automatically have to go back and borrow again with a high interest rate. So it's a good idea to balance this, paying off your debt as well as allocating your money towards savings. Okay, so I think it's an important point to notice. So after you pay off your highest debt, highest interest debt, start paying off your mortgage and your student loans as fast as you can. If you have a mortgage, for example, you can ask your mortgage company if there is a penalty fee for prepaying your mortgage. Like when I'm paying off my mortgage, I always, if I can, I always try to prepay, because that will allow me to pay less of the compounded interest. I can pay it sooner, and it will decrease the total amount of paying off that I have to do. Because like I mentioned at the beginning, when you borrow principal of $200,000 or $300,000, at the end of the 20 or 30 years term of the mortgage, you pay much, like 2 or 3 times more than your principal. So I also covered, I kind of like mixed up all my guidelines. I have 8 of them. So I mentioned that when you're paying off your loan, don't take all your money and pay off your loan right away. Make sure that you pay off your debt, and at the same time allocate toward your savings. And in what proportion, I cannot give you specific guidelines, because I don't know how much debt you may have and what kind of interest you have. But make sure that you always have money for emergencies, because I don't know, maybe you need to do urgent repair in your house, or maybe you need to repair your car, or something like that. So it's always good to have, if you can, 3 to 6 months worth of your lifestyle expenses. And so the final summary of this mini class today: if you have that, work out the solution, the paying off solution, to the point that you sleep well at night, right? It's very important that you don't stress out over this, that to the point that it affects your health. Because living in fear of loan collectors, money collectors, or whatever, I forgot the term, how they called when they call you and bug you with what you have to pay the debt collectors. Here you go. It's not the way to live, right? So I don't know what else is worth in life more than your peace of mind and your sense of dignity. So don't get no assets and no shiny objects worth your while to get yourself in a situation when you are so overwhelmed with with debt that you accumulated and you don't know how to pay it off. So be mindful about borrowing. Be aware of the interest and the cost of the money that you borrow. And once you repay your debt, once you have your savings that will allow you to cover some emergency situations in life, then you can start considering investing in the assets that will provide you, long-term income, hopefully passive income, and that will grow in value over time, and will allow you to have a cash flow for many years to come. So that's what I'm trying to teach in my coaching and my all my programs. Again, be strategic, see bigger picture of your vision, like what is your vision, how do you see yourself, what kind of lifestyle you want to have in a few years down the road. We talked about human biases, we talked about bias of present moment. We don't always think about, what will happen many years down the road. But it's important to see bigger picture and be strategic with all your efforts. And when you have this approach, I'm sure that you will have much more peaceful and much more joyful experience on your journey to whether it's retirement or financial independence. Okay, so I hope that this class was useful. I hope that you have some takeaways, useful takeaways from this class, and I will see you again next time, and we're going to talk about golden rules of wealth creation. I plan to have this class next week because tomorrow I have my jury duty, so I will not be online probably at all. But I'm looking forward to seeing you again, and I want to remind you that we have the doors open to Last and Wealth Academy, and if you sign up before the end of Sunday, I would love to have you as my guest in beautiful, beautiful country, France, and at my 3-day workshop, live workshop. All right, so, and that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you again for your time. Thank you for your attention. And until we meet again, stay empowered.